Well, hello. So hi. I recently watched a bunch of YouTube videos in my free time, which is usually what I do, and I'm kind of stuck on what to record. I promise there'll be another segment of the Turnip Boy playthrough at some point in the future. I just didn't do it today because I wasn't streaming. But I recently saw a really interesting video by a YouTuber named Mina about the Ugly Duckling situation in a lot of the content that was put out like around the 90s and earlier, and how that can be extremely harmful towards people. And it got me thinking, a lot of the focus of that video was on movies. And while I didn't watch a lot of movies as a kid, like really not a lot at all, I did watch a lot of shows. And a lot of those shows were makeover shows, where the goal was to make the person look better than they did before. And as a kid, I didn't really think about the implications of that, but now that I'm older and I've had a little bit more experience in the world, I've had some time to think about how that's impacted me and how that might have impacted you. So let's get into that. So if you were a child of the 90s, you probably know plenty of shows whose entire goal was to make over or beautify the person in question. Now, if you want to watch Mina's video, I have linked it down below if you want to see the movie-based context of this discussion. But if you're coming at this fresh and you're also a child of the 90s that watched a whole lot of makeover shows where either the hair was getting redone or the makeup was getting redone, or in extreme cases, like in the 2000s, such as the Swan, plastic surgery, extreme dieting, and all that crap was involved, stick around. We're gonna get into that. So before we get into kind of the meat of it, I do want to say as a disclaimer, I do not have any negative thoughts on people who decide to get any kind of body augmentation, modification, what have you, to make themselves happy. I fully understand that sometimes some modification needs to be made either for medical reason, for comfort reasons, or it's a choice that people who are of adult consenting age do have the agency and right to do. I'm not disputing that fact. If a nose job, boob job, butt job makes you happy and you've thought about it and you are paying for it, do whatever makes you happy. However, if you were like me growing up and a lot of the focus of these shows was to make the person better in any ways, there's a big fat but I want to interject in that. And that is, if you are pursuing that, please always make sure it is for you and not for someone else, because if you grew up like me, a lot of the reason that you would do certain things may be influenced by some of these shows, and we'll get into why. So to start, let's start with some of the more tamer examples of makeovers of ugly ducklings, shall we say. In some shows, like America's Next Top Model, it was a little more subtle. Granted, what you were starting with was people who were trying to be supermodels, so they already had like one set size, at least in the earlier seasons. And the most change you would see is like hair. Hair grows back. If a hairstylist messes up your hair, it will grow back, usually unless there are extenuating circumstances like lupus or what have you, or male pattern baldness. There's some other circumstances that can weigh in, but for the most part, on the whole, hair grows back. In certain other shows that I grew up with, makeup and styling were a big focus. So what not to wear was one that I used to see a lot on TV, where they would take someone and change their wardrobe and magically make them pretty, and that would happen. You also had the daytime TV shows, which would feature, the rebellious youth who were dressing goth or punk, and the host would force them to dress mainstream, I guess is the nicest way to call it. I wouldn't say it's prep or whatever, but it was mainstream. They would take them from what was a pretty killer alternative outfit and stick them in like, I don't know, a freaking polo shirt and take all their makeup off, and it was just like, okay, cool. Why? But the idea was to make them more acceptable to the parents that brought them in, which I have to wonder how that was legal at the time, but then again, that was the day of Jerry Springer, so who Who fucking knows? And then we get to the more extreme cases, and this show didn't hit my radar until I actually saw Luxeria. I'm probably saying that name wrong. I'll link it. I think Luxeria? I think that's the name. If I'm saying it wrong, I'm really sorry. Cover a very unique show called The Swan. And when I saw Mina's video about the ugly duckling situation, how that can be extremely harmful, this show immediately came to mind based on what I'd already seen. And let's dive into the premise, shall we? If you want to watch the full 1, 2, 3, 4 episodes, I'm not going to be posting those. Go watch, I think it's Luxeria's channel. If I'm saying that wrong, I'm so sorry, dear. But go watch those because she analyzes them in full. But the premise is each episode they bring in 2 women, notably women. Keep that in mind. And these women are either on hard times, have not felt self-confident, and most notably do not have what at the time, the 2000s, would be considered an ideal body type or beauty image. 2000s were fucking weird, man. And they'll pit these 2 women against each other for a chance to appear in a beauty pageant. I think we're already seeing where this is problematic, yeah? Yeah. So they would pit these 2 women against each other who would undergo extensive plastic surgery in a very short amount of time, extreme workout schedules. They would not be able to look in a mirror. They do offer a therapist. Based on what I've seen on Luxeria's coverage, it does seem like it's a online certified therapist. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with that at all, but something about that sits wrong with me and I can't exactly put my finger on why. And essentially, if I'm not mistaken, they have something like 3 or 6 months, maybe tops, to recover, work out, diet extensively, see a therapist, get their hair changed, their makeup changed, and just pop out of a door fully made up into a beautiful, beautiful swan. I don't think I need to tell you why this was extremely problematic. I was blessed in that this thing was not on TV when I was a child because I already have body dysmorphia, very aggressively so, but this probably would have made it worse if I had seen this as a child. Now that I'm actually in therapy, on medication, seeking psychiatric help, I can watch this and not be affected by it. But if I had watched this young, I genuinely don't know what effect it would have had on me, and that scares me a lot. In a lot of these episodes, whoever does not go under the knife for the therapy, or for the surgery, tends to get booted. Whoever is a little more difficult about their transition or doesn't want to do the crazy diet usually gets booted. And at the end of it, I presume all of these manufactured women get pitted against each other in a old school beauty pageant with a modeling contract at the end of it as a prize. Where have we seen that before? Not to bash America's Next Top Model, because look, it's a product of its time. I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but it feels kind of the same of, look, you're not good enough the way you are, so we're gonna rearrange some stuff with either your hair or your makeup or your wardrobe or this or that to make you good enough to be held up to a modeling standard. And I think we know, historically, that kind of standard has changed. It's evolved. When the show first started, I do not believe they had plus-size models, and now they do, although in some later seasons, the actual definition of plus-size gets a little interesting, because apparently it gets a little wonky with exactly how plus you can be to be good enough for the show. It gets fucking weird. On a small scale, the idea of getting a makeover is not an inherently bad thing. In many cases, I still see it as self-care. Say, like this year, I decided I didn't really like the way I was dressing, or the way I was feeling, or the way I looked. Changing my hair color is a perfectly fine thing to do. Hair grows back, who cares? Learning how to do a new makeup style, which is something I did for my human face, not my furry face, is something that's completely fine. Experimenting with makeup or your hair color or what have you, or your wardrobe, trying out new things is not a bad thing. In fact, it's pretty healthy. Testing out what you like is not an inherently bad thing if you're doing it for you. But many of the shows in the 90s, the 2000s, and so on didn't do it for them. Most notably in shows like What Not to Wear, The Swan. I think there was a UK variation called Snog, Marry, Kill or something. It was never really centered or focused on the person. It was not for them. It was usually a family member submitting them to humiliate them for the way that they express themselves, because they didn't like the effect that person's expression would have on them personally. In many of the TV show or the talk shows, it would be a case of they would parade this person out, usually in goth gear or what have you, and it would be a case of, you're making me look bad as a parent, not this person coming in being like, I'm not happy with how I am, I would like to change and I need help, which is very critical. If any of these shows were still going on today, I have to wonder how many people who don't sit perfectly on the binary or don't like to express like a very specific feminine or masculine look, or maybe more into an alternative scene, would have been treated or are still treated today by people who grew up with that media. If you grew up with the media that tells you that you need to look a certain way to get a man, which is kind of what a lot of those shows were hinting at, like especially the Snog, Marry, Kill show, what they would do is they would show the before to people on the street and ask like, oh, do you find this person attractive? Which, if you are dressing for other people, you are doing something wrong. The only time you should be dressing for other people is if you are doing a job interview. And it's not supposed to be like a sexually arousing thing. It should be a case of, I'm trying to put forth a professional look to show that I can be professional in the workplace. Not, I want to present myself as a hot young thing for all the boys to ogle at, instead of dressing the way that makes me happy. And that is disgusting. And we see it a lot in, like as Mina pointed out, the movies that came out in that time. Pretty Woman, Princess Diaries. I could probably name more, but like I said, I didn't watch a lot of movies as a kid. So those are the two that I saw. But the idea that like these makeovers will magically transform them into a better person, the best version of themselves, in a lot of cases that I saw, it was very clear that producers fed them lines to support that narrative. But if you looked at their faces, it was very obvious that that's not what they wanted, except for one case, the Swan. In the Swan, it's very clear that many of the people who are signing up for this are often recovering from massive loss, extremely depressed, have some form of PTSD, very often, have very low self-esteem, and are very vulnerable. And that's terrifying, because the last thing you want to do to someone like that is tell them they need 50 surgeries and like all that shit. Let me tell you why. If someone is already that broken down, putting them under the knife and putting them through an extremely rigorous health plan, which in many cases is just the same plan verbatim over and over, regardless of their body type or dietary needs or what have you, and put them on the same cookie cutter therapist plan, is dangerous. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a dietitian, just to be clear. But if you have someone in that vulnerable of a place being told pretty point blank that they're ugly, dumpy, saggy, wrinkly, old looking, their self-esteem is going to have a really nasty plummet. And in some of the cases, I would really like to see what some of these women look like now, because the sheer number of surgeries that some of these women go under or go through for this show are insane. Almost every single woman gets a tummy tuck. Almost every single woman gets an eyebrow lift. Almost every single woman gets a boob job or a butt job or a nose job. Someone even had her gums lifted. It's insane. By today's standards, we think of like extensive like plastic surgery as a little crazy. Like, okay, someone gets like a boob job. That's not insane. But someone getting boob and tummy and gum and eyebrows and butt and thighs and this and that. Whoa, that's a lot. And the one time one woman on the show, so far as the episodes that I've seen, said, no, I want to keep this feature because my daughter has this feature and I don't want her to think that that's ugly or undesirable. Guess what happened? She got sent home because she was being too difficult. What does that say to younger women? Yikes. What the fuck? And it's not exclusive to women either. I'm sure in many cases, men or those who sit on the binary are in the same really awkward position watching some of these shows. Watching someone who is extremely skinny be portrayed as like, not manly, or someone extremely large being portrayed as lazy or smelly, even though those things are not mutually exclusive. Bigger people don't inherently smell. By the way, fun fact for the class, skinnier men aren't not manly by default. Fun fact for the class. But seeing that kind of depiction is really damaging. And I have to imagine it is just as damaging for those who aren't trying to express one gender or the other. If they grew up with the shows where either you have to be super hot woman or super buff man, it has to be extremely damaging. And not being that makes you an ugly duckling who needs a transformation. Oh God, and like, just to be clear, but if you have someone in that vulnerable of a place being told pretty point blank that they're ugly, dumpy, saggy, wrinkly, old looking, their self-esteem is gonna have a really nasty plummet. And in some of the cases, I would really like to see what some of these women look like now, because the sheer number of surgeries that some of these women go through for this show are insane. Almost every single woman gets a tummy tuck. Almost every single woman gets an eyebrow lift. Almost every single woman gets a boob job or a butt job or a nose job. Someone even had her gums lifted. It's insane. By today's standards, we think of like extensive like plastic surgery as a little crazy. Like, okay, someone gets like a boob job. That's not insane. But someone getting boob and tummy and gum and eyebrows and butt and thighs and this and that. Whoa! That's a lot. And the one time one woman on the show, so far as the episodes that I've seen, said, no, I want to keep this feature because my daughter has this feature and I don't want her to think that that's ugly or undesirable. Guess what happened? She got sent home because she was being too difficult. What does that say to younger women? Yike, what the fuck? And it's not exclusive to women either. I'm sure in many cases, men or those who sit on the binary are in the same really awkward position watching some of these shows. Watching someone who is extremely skinny be portrayed as like, not manly, or someone extremely large being portrayed as lazy or smelly, even though those things are not mutually exclusive. Bigger people don't inherently smell. By the way, fun fact for the class, skinnier men aren't not manly by default. Fun fact for the class. But seeing that kind of depiction is really damaging. And I have to imagine it is just as damaging for those who aren't trying to express one gender or the other. If they grew up with the shows where either you have to be super hot woman or super buff man, it has to be extremely damaging. And not being that makes you an ugly duckling who needs a transformation. Oh God, and like, not even all the shows were that stylish. Remember like the original Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, which was a show that I watched growing up. Like, I didn't know any better. In some cases, like, yeah, the transformations are pretty minimal. Just a haircut, finding some clothes that fit the guy better. Nothing too harmful, really. But if you look a little bit closer, some of the comments in the older seasons did dig. They dug pretty deep. And I have to imagine that that's not healthy. Now, something I haven't really brought up in this is some of those crazy weight loss shows also had that ugly duckling effect for both genders. And one thing that I've kind of learned through watching different fitness YouTubers, is that there is a healthy way to go about it and there's a very unhealthy way. And they're very, very distinct. I've dated people who are health nuts before, and there's a clear-cut difference between, having a plan and sticking to it and going to the extreme. And sometimes when there's representation in these shows that is unhealthy, instead of going to a plan, people will go to the extreme because they want to get there faster, and it's not healthy or safe. And kind of showing it in this condensed format and not really making people aware that no, actually there's more work that goes into this. It's not just 3 weeks, boom, you're fit, is dangerous. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that, like, yes, there is a healthy way to go to the gym and diet and exercise and live your life, but there's also shortcuts that people take that are not healthy. There are steroids, which are not healthy and have a lot of really nasty side effects, but if you're trying to get there quick, that is the way some people do it. Exercise purging is a thing. If you weren't aware, there are some people that exercise themselves to the point of like being sick, ill, and doing damage to their bodies. It's not healthy. And starving yourself to try and get that body faster. It's something that I did growing up. I watched, I don't know how many of these shows growing up. And while, thank God, they did not involve the sheer amount of plastic surgery that some of the the shows that came out in the 2000s involved, I saw those very lanky bodies and I wanted that. And I exercised and exercised and exercised and I couldn't get it. So my dumb brain thought maybe if I just stop eating, I'll get it. And fun fact for the class, that's not how that works. Don't do that. That's extremely unhealthy, and I don't do that anymore. That whole period ended right before college. Thank God, because not healthy, wouldn't advise it. But yeah, when Mina talks about like the ugly duckling situation, how that is extremely damaging and unhealthy to the way that people saw themselves, or maybe continue to see themselves if they were exposed to that as kids, it just brought me back to some of those makeover shows and taking a really hard critical look at where they're coming from and what damage they were actually doing at the time. And I genuinely hope none of these shows make any kind of comeback. Nowadays we have TLC kind of putting their hat in the cringe ring with trying to find the biggest people they can and dramatizing their lives in a way that I still think is disingenuous and kind of gross. And if you want to see someone cover that really well, Michelle McDaniel is someone I watch specifically because they are a fitness and health YouTuber who actually started as a larger person and found a healthy, safe way to become a muscular bodybuilder woman, but does not push that upon her fans, which I can really respect as someone that would not want that body type for myself necessarily, but thinks she wears it really fucking well. But I can respect the fact that she's not super judgy, and what works for her, she understands works for her, and she also understands that there's different approaches for other people. If you want to watch coverage of that show and other crazy shows, she does a really good job on them. She's also a really rad cosplayer, so that's sick. But some of the things I've seen are just like yikes. So if 2021 could do like me a big solid favor and just not ever come back to that train. I know we like to bring up oldies and revival, just don't revive those. Please don't revive those. If anything, I would way prefer to see a show where it's all about like expression and fashion and everything is celebrated, not just the mainstream, preppy, bright colored, summery. No. I want to see like a show that actually celebrates how anyone expresses. Not that they're ever going to greenlight that, because there'd be just no drama, and why would that ever be on TV? But I think we can do away with some of the shows we've seen in the past with like the very extreme things. Botched is one that I can watch and not feel as uncomfortable, because it's usually people coming in to fix messed up surgeries or procedures to get them reduced down or fixed. But it's important to note that the same surgeon on Botched was also on the Swan and telling women that they needed tummy tucks and eyebrow lifts and 50 different procedures to make themselves be beautiful enough for the pageant. So keep that in mind if you decide to watch it. And if you don't believe me, watch Luxurious vids. You'll recognize him right off the bat, like immediately. So yeah, this is unscripted, obviously, because it's a big freaking mess. But it was just some food for thought and something I thought you might find interesting and my opinion on it. So till next time, doodles.